Hey guys, welcome to 2026, and to start off the new year, I thought I would be doing a topic about Cursor, the AI coding tool. So over the past couple of years, I think it's pretty obvious AI integrated coding assistants have become very widely used in the world of software development. And some of the more well-known ones are Claude Code, Cursor, Google's Anti-Gravity, OpenAI's Codex, Kilo Code, OpenCode, etc. That being said, the features of these tools are often really rapidly changing, and there's also pretty frequently a lack of up-to-date tutorials for how to utilize these tools to their full extent. So for this video, I'm going to be going over one of these tools in particular, Cursor, and explaining the key features that you should be aware of in 2026. And so in addition to that, I'm going to be going over a little bit of the optimizations and strategies that Cursor uses under the hood to help turn raw LLMs into viable coding assistants. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so first an overview. Cursor's an AI-powered code editor that lets you ask questions about your codebase, plan new features, debug, and make changes through natural language using large language models. And it's actually a fork of the widely used code editor VS Code, which has been developed by Microsoft. And this is the reason I initially chose Cursor to try and develop features using AI, was because I already used VS Code. I was really familiar with the features it offered. I loved the plugin system, and it was super easy to just integrate that with Cursor right out the box. But that being said, there's a million other tools for AI coding, like Claude Code, Google, Anti-Gravity, all the ones I mentioned earlier. So some are plugins, some are IDEs, and some are activated with command line. And I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. The two most popular at this point, in my experience, are Cursor and Claude Code. But that being said, I just recommend you try out a bunch of them and see what works best for you in your workflow. Cursor is built on top of large language models, and the use of them is not cheap. They offer a range of different plans which basically cap your usage of their AI coding tools. Personally, I'm on the Pro Plus plan, which gives me extended usage on the latest models, but Hobby or Pro are also fine if you're okay with limited use of the code agent. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you've already installed the application and you've opened up some kind of coding project you want to work on. So this is just a demo project that I made for this short video, and to start off, the features and the layout of Cursor is changing pretty frequently, so what you see when you first open up the application might not be exactly the same as this, but I think the principles mostly apply. And so firstly, if you've used VS Code before, this should all be very, very familiar. You recognize the File Explorer, you recognize the terminal down here, and the text editor. But that being said, I'm just going to go over briefly the layout and how to adjust the layout in Cursor. So if you go up to this little gear icon here and you click on it, we can see that there's different ways that you can toggle the layout. So firstly, if I toggle the sidebar, that gets rid of this. And this is how I can actually, if you're not familiar with the VS Code, this is how I can look at all the different folders and files in my code base. So for example, I have the API, I have the UI, and I can just click on these and I can press on them and double click on some of these files and end up viewing them in the text editor. And the next thing here is the panel. The panel is the terminal down here. So currently I have an API, UI, and I have two Cursor related things down here. And also there's the central editor, which I can toggle with this. And so this is actually the text editor where you can enter text and modify your code base. And so lastly, if I look here, there are two options that are AI enabled features. So all of these are just straight from VS Code, and the chat and the agents actually have to do with the AI capabilities. And so if I toggle the chat, that's what we see right here. And later on in the video, this is where we're going to be entering commands to the Cursor agent in order to modify our code base or ask questions or do a whole list of different things. And the agents just shows past agent interactions we've had. So you can see I made a few different requests for the code base so far, and if we click on these, we can see the exact conversations I actually had with the agents. So if I want to see more about the settings, I can click on Cursor Settings, and this is just the information surrounding my account and my general setup. So I'm on the General tab right now, and there's a button to manage account. There's a button to upgrade to Ultra. Right now I'm on Pro Plus, and Ultra is just a higher tier with more usage. There's the different layout settings. So right now I'm on the agent layout. which has certain configurations. And if I click here, this just gets rid of a lot of those panels that I was discussing earlier. There's also editor settings relating to, the font, formatting, minimap, keyboard shortcuts. You can import your settings from VS Code, which is really nice. And then there's some other things relating to privacy and notifications. But yeah, that's just like a quick overview of some of the settings and layout of Cursor. Okay, so now that we've gone over some of the basic stuff, we'll get into the AI capabilities of Cursor, which is the interesting stuff, right? So firstly, I'll show a feature called the Cursor tab. And what this is, I can just start clicking around on my code base, press enter a couple times, and we can see that as I press enter, some of these suggestions start popping up. So for example, here's just a comment that is suggesting, that Cursor is suggesting for creating a default user. So if I press tab, that will accept the suggestion it's making. So let's press tab right here. And after I make this application in my code base, which is coming from the suggestion from Cursor, then it has another suggestion right underneath because it's kind of inferring what I want it to do based on my actions in the code base. And so right here, there's the code for adding a default user. And so if I press tab again, that will accept that code. And so it has a bunch more suggestions here, right? It's suggesting to add code for creating a note for my to-do list application. And I don't want to accept this though, so let me just press escape. And I don't really want this either. I was just using this to demonstrate so I can get rid of this as well. But so let's actually add something that might be useful for our application, even in a very small way, right? So I'll actually open up this right now. And this is my application as it stands currently. It's a very simple to-do list. I can add a task and just enter something random. So yeah, you can create tasks, you can delete tasks, and there's also very simple login and logout capabilities. So I'm going to open up another file called utils.ts. And I'm just going to put in some utility functions here. So firstly, I'm going to export function, convert to lowercase. And so it's already starting to suggest that because I was playing around with this earlier. But we can see it's starting to suggest some of the input for this function. So if I press tab, that'll accept that. And I inspect the contents of what it's going to suggest for the rest of the function, which is return stir the string .to lowercase. Okay, that seems pretty good to me. So I'll press tab again. And let's say I want something else, export function. Okay, it's already suggesting something, convert to uppercase. So I'll press that, press tab to accept it, and I'll press tab again. Okay, so that seems pretty good. So now I'm going to go up to my notes list component, and this is the component that actually shows these different notes right here. So let's say I want to take the title, and I only want to show it in lowercase. So if I get rid of this and I do convert to lowercase, we can see it's already suggesting what I wrote in utils.ts. So if I press tab, and then I, actually import it, and then I press save, I go back and we can see that it's now lowercase. So, that's a very simple example, but it's, just one way you can use the tab in order to suggest things. And so something that I actually don't like about the Cursor tab is it can get pretty annoying if you're just navigating around your code base. So for example, if I'm just testing things out, you're like pressing enter a couple times or something, it'll suggest something. And that can get annoying if I'm just trying to explore and maybe make very specific small changes to my code base. So sometimes what I do is I can just go back to this Cursor settings and I go back to the tab. And there's a bunch of sub options here, like for partial accepts, suggestions while commenting, etc. I can just turn all of this off. And if I go back here, we can see I click around for a little bit and it doesn't show up. So if you want to disable that option, you're totally free to do so. All right, and now I'm going to talk about the chat feature of Cursor, and that's what we see right here. And this is probably what most people are familiar with and what offers the most transformative value when it comes to coding. And you're probably aware of this at this point, but if you enter instructions into this chat window, you can provide instructions that the Cursor agent can use to modify your code base. And in this context, an agent is just an LLM that can understand your instructions, it can reason about them in relation to your code, and it can make decisions or modifications based on those instructions. And those instructions could be anything. You could provide them to add features, ask questions about your app, make a plan, or just help debug things. And at this point, I think it's almost easier to just demonstrate the functionality, and afterwards we'll explain what's happening and how we can customize it. going back to our application, right now we can add tasks and we can also delete tasks by pressing this button. However, there's no way to edit these tasks. So ideally, that's a feature we want, and we can use Cursor to help us implement it. So I'm just going to minimize this and go back to our Cursor application. And in the editor, I already wrote out a little prompt for the agent in our chat. And it just says something very simple. It says, can you add a button in the shape of a pencil to the to-do list card? When pressing on this button, open a modal that allows me to edit the to-do list note. The API is already implemented. So the API already exists for this. I just need to add the front end in order to allow the user to actually edit it. And I'm just doing this to keep the bounds of the feature pretty simple so we can review it easily. So I will just press enter. And after I press enter, we can see that the agent is now working on implementing our feature. And what's nice about this is that I can see the chain of thought of the agent as it is actually implementing this. So for example, I can see that at the top, it says reviewing the current implementation to understand the structure. It's exploring the files right after that, checking the available API endpoints for editing notes, checking the update note DTO type, etc. So we can actually see what it's thinking about and what changes it's making in real time. And of course, this does normally take a little bit of time. And as it's happening, we can see the individual files as well. So like, firstly, it's editing the api.ts. And this is where, this is the one file I have in my front end that has all the APIs. So it's adding a function here to allow me to call the API for updating a note. And then after it does that, it realizes that it needs to update the notes list as well in order to add a new icon. So it's adding a pencil here. And what's nice about Cursor is that it's very similar to looking at Git diffs, So you can see like the difference between what you had before and the change that Cursor is actually making to your code base. So it looks like it's probably about done at this point. It's gone through all the files and it's made those changes, and it summarizes the changes it's made as well, so I can just scroll down and make sure that these all look good. But so the nice part about this also is this is a front end change, so I can just test it out on my front end. So if I open up my UI again, just refresh the page, okay, well, we can see that there's two buttons here. So if I press this this pencil, okay, it's opening up a modal, and it looks pretty good so far. So it allows me to edit the title and the description. So I will edit the title, and I will also edit the description. And when I press save, okay, it looks like it's working. Reload, seems like it's pretty good just from my cursory investigation, no pun intended. And so if I go back to the editor, all right, well, let's actually take a look at all these file changes it's made and make sure that these are in line with what I wanted. So if I look at this little tab up here, this allows me to go to the different files. If I just press this arrow key, it'll bring me to all the files that it edited. So if I start at the first one, I can just go through these one by one and make sure that they're good. So this is the api.ts. It's adding a new function here that represents an API call. Okay, this looks pretty good. So if the file looks good to me, I can press this button called Keep File, and that lets Cursor know that this file is acceptable and that the changes are something that are in line with what I wanted, and it can forget about that and let me review the next of these files. And so if I want to look at the next file it changes, I can press that, and we can see this is the notes list, and I'm just doing some investigating here. Okay, so it looks like it added a new prop for on edit. So if I scroll down, yeah, it looks like the actual internals of this was modified a bit so that there's now a pencil icon, and when we click on that, it activates that on edit function that was passed in as a prop. Okay, that looks pretty good as well, so I can keep that. And I can go to the last file, and I'm just going to kind of take its word for it. Obviously, if this was a real code base, I'd want to review this a bit more in depth, and I can keep this file as well. So after I keep all of those, these changes they were already applied to my code base, and now Cursor knows about that. So yeah, that's pretty good. But let's say we want to make a little bit of a change here, right? So if I scroll back and I press, not add task, but if I press the edit button, okay, let's say I don't really like the color of this. Well, I can go back and I can just make another question. So can you change the color of the save or of the edit note modal button so that it's blue instead of green? And that's a really nice thing about Cursor and these other AI coding assistants is that they're very iterative. If you accept a bunch of changes and then you notice there's something you don't like, okay, you can just add another command in the chat and it will follow up on that and it will apply that to your code base afterwards. So we can see that it's doing the same thing right here. I can scroll through these and see what's going on. Okay, so on the home page, it's, if I scroll back actually, yeah, so on the home page, it changed a button here. And if I keep that and I test it out, just refresh, press, we can see that now the save changes is blue instead of green. Okay, so that's pretty cool, right? Just asked it for a change and it was able to do that as well. But let's, try something that maybe we don't want to accept. So for example, let's say I want a ton of extra padding on some of these cards. I'll just ask it right here. Can you add a bunch of extra padding on the to-do list cards? And I can press that or let the agent start working on it and give it a second so it can work on it. And if I go back, okay, this is a little much for my taste, right? This doesn't really look great. So actually, I think maybe I won't accept this. So we can see that there's an option up here to undo file or keep file. And there's also options for all these different lines. So if I just press undo file here, or if I press undo for both of these changes, it'll do the same thing and it will revert the change. So if I go back here, okay, we can see that the padding is back to where it used to be. So that's all pretty useful. And there's a few other optimizations you can do here just to give better context to the agent. So for example, I can use this @ key, and this will allow me to reference specific files. So let's say I want to change something in the nav bar. So can you change the background and then just put navbar.tsx to, I'm going to say to black. And we can see here it's referencing that file. So I don't even need to say in the nav bar. I can provide specifically what file I want changed, and it will be able to update it there. And that's generally not the most useful on a very small code base like this. But if you're working on a very large code base, you want to be as specific as possible so the agent knows exactly what you want and it's able to make that change accordingly. Okay, so let's keep that file, right? Even though not a huge fan of it, but whatever. And then one last thing I want to show you is what's nice is you can highlight individual pieces of code or individual lines and actually ask for changes there. So for example, let me highlight this and I'll just say, can you change the icon here so it's a, what do we want this to be? Let's say light bulb and not a check square. Also revert the nav bar to have a background of white instead of black. So I can give that instruction now. And once again, it's planning the next move. And the one thing that is a little bit tedious is depending on how, how complicated your request is, it can sometimes take a while. But that being said, I'm using, for the time being, very, very simple changes. If you're doing a larger feature, it's obviously going to be worth it because it's going to be changing hundreds of lines of code that might take a long time for you to do instead of just changing a few lines here. Okay, so this looks, let's just verify this. Nice. Okay, so we change it back to white and we have a light bulb instead of the check square before. So we will just keep that. Yeah, so that's just a really quick overview of the chat feature and how you can give instructions to your agent in order to change your code base. Now, obviously, like I said before, this is a small code base, so it's not the most exciting or most useful here. But I'm sure on large code bases, as I've personally experienced in my own time using these tools, they're very effective if you have a lot of code that needs to be changed, or if you have code that spans a lot of different files. So Okay, so that's a really quick demo of the chat feature, and what I just showed you is definitely enough to get started with using Cursor. That being said, there's a few more things I want to show about the chat feature itself. So firstly, and very importantly, is the model selection. And if you click here, we can see that right now I'm using Opus 4.5, but there's a list of different options that I can click if I want to use a different LLM. And this is an important thing to bring up, which is there's a difference between Cursor and the LLM. Like the LLM is sort of the core engine that powers these changes, and Cursor is like the apparatus built on top of it that's giving you this nice interface, but it calls the model under the hood. And all these different models are roughly what you would find on the website. So like, Claude Opus 4.5, if you go to the Claude website, it's basically the same model that you would use if you're chatting on the website, as opposed to what Cursor is calling underneath the hood. And so previously what I was using before 4.5 is just Auto, and that's where Cursor decides on your behalf which model to use based on things like quality, and it says quality and speed, and then what's best suited for your task. And, I think there's a lot of different opinions people have on these different models. Like some people say that, Gemini 3 is the best for UI, or that Opus 4.5 is the best all-around model. And I think everyone has different experiences, so ultimately you should just try out these different ones and see which one works best. So yeah, that's it. And one other thing I want to say is that when these requests are sent to the underlying LLM, it's not just sending the request or the instruction that you provide, like in this chat, but it's also including like all this previous stuff. And that's being sent alongside your question or request to the LLM because it's providing more context. And that's an important thread that we're going to get into next, which is like the necessity of providing context to the agent and how that helps it make a more intelligent choice about changing your code base. And speaking of context, the model context, or the context window, is basically all the questions we ask the agent, like I said, as well as the output from the model that we see here. So every time we ask that new question, the previous info is fed along with our new question to the underlying language model. And that brings up a very important point, which is how important it is to manage context. And the context window that Cursor provides is 200,000 tokens. But imagine if you have a long conversation with Cursor and you're asking it like dozens of new features, and the model's adding, new output from your terminal, as well as the content in your files and the code snippets from its own output. Soon this context greatly exceeds the 200,000 maximum. And even if it doesn't exceed 200,000 tokens, the more context you have, the more potentially unnecessary data that the model has to deal with, which means less accurate answers. It's just the same with like a human conversation, right? It takes way longer to get out relevant data from a long text if there's a bunch of irrelevant data that you have to read and understand as well. And not to mention that Cursor charges you by the token, so you don't want to waste money either. So how do you prevent this context here from getting like way too unwieldy when you're giving instructions to the agent? Well, one thing you can do is if you press this plus button, this opens up a new chat. And anything you put in this new chat is not visible to this other one, and vice versa. So this is helpful for managing context, like I said before, and it gives cheaper, faster, and more relevant responses. But on top of that, it's also good if you have multiple agents working on different things at the same time. So for example, like completely ignoring context, maybe this agent could be working on like the web application, and this one could be working on the mobile application, for instance. So going back to the context, Cursor has some clever tricks of handling this itself. When it comes to the context in a particular window, Cursor routinely summarizes your previous text, so there isn't too much information provided at once to the model. And this summarization isn't just restricted to conversations, it can also happen with files. This makes sense because if you include a reference to a very big file in your instruction, this alone could exceed the context window limit. And this is just what makes Cursor and other AI-enabled tooling so much more powerful than just using an LLM by itself. Cursor is essentially a wrapper over these models, and it performs these optimizations to provide better context about your codebase, which makes the model output way more accurate than if you just provided your entire codebase at once. So it's doing all these things for you that you don't even need to think about, and the output is a much more accurate, relevant series of codebase changes than if you were to just like post in a couple of files yourself into an LLM and copy paste. Another really important optimization that Cursor provides is tool calling. And agents can do a lot more than just generate text. They have access to tools which let them retrieve data dynamically from your code base. And the Cursor docs provide, sort of a good analogy. Imagine if you're helping someone cook dinner over the phone. You can give them instructions, but if it's just you giving them instructions, you're kind of blind, right? You don't know what's going on. You can't see their fridge or taste the food they're making. But now imagine you can ask your friend to send you photos of their fridge, or they can tell you the temperature of their oven. At that point, you're in a much better place to actually give them instructions, because you're able to ask questions in order to get data that gives you more information that provides you a way to give a more accurate response. And so if we apply that to actually using agents in order to ask questions about our code base, let's say we have a very simple question, right? Like, what tech stack is this using? So if I ask this to our agent, what tech stack is this project using? We can see it's planning its next moves, it's thinking like we expect it to. And then right here, we can see that it's actually reading some of these files. Now that got collapsed because it's exploring, but if we uncollapse it, we can see that it read our package.json on the front end and on the back end. And so those are actually tool calls. The agent realizes it needs to know the content of this file in order to answer a question, so it invokes the tool for reading files. And so let's say I ask another question at the end, which is, what file contains a button with the sign-in functionality? And we ask this question as well. We can see that it's actually starting to use grep. It's using grep in order to explore our code base right now. And this shows us that, the agents, they're intelligent enough to understand what they can do in order to find out more about our code base. And they can actually take those tool calls, which are essentially just API calls to regular functions, and they can use them to better extract information based on our code base. And a full list of tools is available on Cursor's website, but many of the commonly used ones are the read file, grep, delete file, and the terminal tools. So those are some of the essential features of the agentic chat. However, the feature I just demonstrated is just one of the modes of the agent. Cursor's agents don't just write code for you, but they can be integrated into your entire software development workflow. And as of this video, there's 4 different modes of the agent. So there's, you can actually click right here and you can toggle between them. There's agent mode, there's plan mode, there's debug mode, and there's ask mode. And these are basically different strategies you can put the agent into so it can do specific things for you. So we just covered the agent, which is for basically anything, but generally I tend to use it for modifying code. And the next thing I'll go over is the ask mode. And as Cursor describes, it's ask Cursor questions about your code base. And, if I open up a new chat, I need to select it again. Whoops. I can ask it kind of the same questions that I did previously. Like I can ask it, what tech stack is our project using? And it's nice for asking questions because it's not able to actually modify your code base. And if we go to the Cursor docs, it has this really nice matrix for us to show us the capabilities of these different modes. And for the ask mode, we can see that it has a list of tools that it's able to use, and it's only able to use search tools. So that goes back to our earlier conversation about tool calling. The ask agent is deliberately kind of hindered. It's not able to use every tool that Cursor has available for the agent mode because you're only supposed to use it for asking questions about your code base. And another one of the agentic modes we can look at is the plan mode. So if I go to this drop down again, I can go to here where it says plan, and it says create detailed plans for accomplishing tasks. So if I click that, I already copy and pasted a additional feature that I want added to this application. And this is something that's probably a little bit too big to just do in one prompt with the agent mode that I had earlier. So this is if we want to create an admin panel for this application, and it should show the following information. So the top 5 most recently edited to-dos, a leaderboard of active users, user activity over time, a compact paginated list of every to-do in the application with sorting options. So we can see there's actually multiple different features here. And these are also features that require both database, backend, and front end changes. So there's really a lot going on here. And if I were to just try to do this all in one prompt, maybe I get something that kind of works, but it wouldn't really give me a scalable, clear, long-lasting solution that I would be able to rely on for a long time in the future. And also, I just wouldn't really understand the internals. And that's a problem if you're working on an application. And if you delegate too much over to the AI, well, all of a sudden you lose sight of how your code base actually works, and therefore it's harder to improve it in the future. So if we do something with the plan mode like this, I'm providing a plan for what I want, and I press enter, what it's going to do is create a detailed plan for how it can start working on this and implementing all these different features. So I'm just going to give it a while because it's reading all the different files that are necessary in order to do this. And if I just keep waiting, so firstly, what it'll do is it'll actually ask a few clarifying questions. And this is because it's supposed to be kind of a back and forth between me and the agent. It's supposed to help me figure out what it is I want and help the agent figure out how to accomplish that. So the first question it's asking is, what should user activity over time represent? Should it show notes created over time, notes edited over time, or both? And so this is an example where it's like, this is great if you have kind of a vague idea of something you want to implement, because it will at least try to specify and narrow down exactly what it is. So let's say I want to see notes created over time, for instance. And the second question is, how should the active user's leaderboard be ranked? What makes a user active? And I'll just pick one of these randomly. And if I click continue, there might be a few more of these, but okay, it's actually just about finished. So once it finishes the plan, it comes up with this plan.md file. And this is a markdown file that just has the overall summary of what it wants to do. It's kind of like a spec, right? So it has the admin panel implementation here at the top. It gives an overview. It gives the architecture as well. So we can see this is really quite a complicated feature. And it's still actually working on the plan right now, but it shows the data flow right here, and it shows the different backend changes it's going to make. So first it needs to make a guard for the authentication, then it needs to extend the service we currently have, and it needs to extend the controller as well, create DTOs, and then it has the front end changes also. So what this is supposed to be doing is you have a very vague idea of what you want to do, you help discuss it with the plan mode of the agent, it will come up with a plan. And of course, some of these I might not actually like, or some of them I might want to make some clarifications on, or some of these things I might want to change. So I might say, actually take out the leaderboard feature. I don't like it. So if I just give another prompt, it will update this plan accordingly. And since it's a markdown file, I can also change things as I like. But we can see that it's rebuilding the plan after I give it a instruction, and it's taking out that leaderboard feature. So I'm not actually going to implement this right now because it would probably take a long time, but this is supposed to be an overview of how you can use these different modes, and you can use the agents to not just write code for you, but to help brainstorm ideas and solutions and to ask questions about your code base. And it's really supposed to be an all-in-one tool that you could theoretically incorporate into every step of your workflow instead of just asking it for updating a few files here and there. Okay, and the last mode there is the debug mode. So if you click this drop down again, you can go to the debug mode. And if you have any issues in your application, you can post in some details about it here, and the agent will sort of walk through the debugging process step by step in order to help guide you to a solution. And I've personally not used this that much because you can get a lot of the same functionality out of either the agent mode or out of the ask mode. So it doesn't seem that necessary for me, but I did want to mention it nonetheless. And the last part of the agentic features that I'm going to mention is the browser. And so if I actually enter in the command for opening browser and click that, and just press enter here, this is the application, but it's rendered within the cursor UI. So theoretically, what that's supposed to allow you to do is to edit things a bit easier because you can click on these specific elements. So we see there's some buttons here at the top, right? Like if I click this one right here, this lets you select different elements. So I can select this and it will actually show up in this chat feature. So if I, want to change something about this, instead of actually having to put in the text of, oh, can you change the button on the home page to be this color, I can select it here and I can say the instructions right in this chat. And there's some other options as well, like you can take a screenshot and you can also show the CSS inspector. Now, personally, I've not used this feature a lot either because I just don't think it's that necessary. If you're a developer and if you've worked on front-end repositories before, you're familiar with understanding the relationship between the UI and the code. So it's just a lot easier for me to ask it to do things in code. I think if you're not as familiar with the UI and you're not really a developer, it could make things a bit easier, but personally, I haven't used it much. Okay, so one more thing I do want to mention before I go on to the next topic is the inline editing. And so we've already done instructions in the chat. I think that's pretty straightforward. Another way you can get the agent to modify things in your code base is you can just highlight it as is. And we can see there's two options. You can either add it to the chat or you can do a quick edit. If I press quick edit and then I give some instructions here, like change the name to Samuel, I can just press enter and it does basically the same thing, but on just the highlighted chunk of code that I have. And this is something that's a little more convenient to do if it's just a small piece of code you want to change and you don't want to go through the complicated process of like having the agent do the thinking analysis and then having to go back and forth in the chat. Those are some of the core features of Cursor. There's a lot of other features as well, including the BugBot, CLI, parallel agents, MCP, but all of those are not really necessary to use the tool. This video was pretty short, I'm hoping, and was meant to give you a primer on the important parts of Cursor in 2026 so you can use it effectively in your code base to speed up your workflow. And there's also a good chance, like I said before, that the UI or the features of Cursor may change since this video was published, but I'm hoping you can still get a lot of the core concepts here. And I think there's one last thing to touch on before I end the video, which is how do I decide between Cursor and some of these other solutions, like I said before, Claude Code, Anti-Gravity, etc. I will say Cursor is probably the most mature. I think it came out in 2023, which is only a couple of years ago, but in this space, that makes it pretty mature. And like I said before, also, if you have VS Code experience, it's a very, very similar experience to that. Like it's this almost the exact same UI, except it just has this agentic chat feature on the side. And I will say, in terms of the philosophy, Cursor tries to provide a more hands-on experience. Like I said, it's so similar to VS Code that if you're a developer, it's easy to just jump right in. And you can still look at all of the text and the code pretty easily. You can look at the file explorer. You have access to the terminal easily. It's just an IDE or a text editor with a little bit of agentic features here. And I think this is a little bit different of an approach from something like Claude Code, where there is more emphasis on just being able to interact solely with the agent. You can give instructions to multiple agents at once, just like you can in Cursor, but you use that in lieu of or alongside of your primary IDE. So I think it really just depends what kind of philosophy you want. There's also some other solutions which are plugins to VS Code, and you can just use your VS Code setup and then have another terminal open with, I think there's something like Rue Code or Klein or other plugins like that, which you can use to help navigate your code base as well. So yeah, that's just a quick overview of Cursor, how it works and some of the features, and I will say good luck and happy coding in 2026.